Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really honored to be here tonight celebrating Unbossed, How Black Girls Are Leading the Way with Khristi Lauren Adams and Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes. This event is co-sponsored by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history, and we are always grateful to partner with them. So first, I'll introduce Dr. Walker-Barnes, who is a clinical psychologist, public theologian, and ecumenical minister whose work focuses upon healing the legacies of racial and gender oppression. A professor of practical theology and pastoral care at Columbia Theological Seminary, Dr. Chanequa is the author of I Bring the Voices of My People, A Womanist Vision for Racial Reconciliation, and Too Heavy a Yoke, Black Women and the Burden of Strength, as well as nearly 24 journal articles and book chapters in theology and psychology. And if folks follow Charis on Instagram, you will see that Dr. Walker-Barnes popped by Charis earlier today to sign those books. So you can get you a signed copy if you don't have one yet, which we're very grateful to you for doing that today. It's always fun when we get to send out signed copies. So thank you. And the woman of the hour tonight is Khristi Lauren Adams, who is a speaker, author, youth advocate, and ordained minister from New Jersey. A graduate of Temple University and Princeton Theological Seminary, Adams is the Dean of Spiritual Life and Equity and instructor of religious studies at the Hill School in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Christy is the author of Parable of the Brown Girl, as well as Unbossed, How Black Girls Are Leading the Way, and its middle grade version, Black Girls Unbossed, Young World Changers Leading the Way, all of which are available from Charis tonight. The books are published by Broadleaf and Beaming Books. Parable of the Brown Girl, Adams' 2021 debut, won the Best Young Adult Book from the New York Black Librarians Caucus and the African American Literary Awards. Adams founded the Becoming Conference, an annual conference and leadership cohort designed to empower, educate, and inspire young women. Christy is a 2017 alum of Lead New Jersey, a selective year-long program to educate, transform, and empower the next generation of leaders from the public, social, and private sectors. She serves on the advisory board for Word Made Flesh, a nonprofit organization existing to serve among the most vulnerable in the world. Khristi Lauren Adams lives in East Brunswick, New Jersey. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for celebrating your beautiful books with us tonight. We're very honored, and I want to encourage folks who are watching at home, feel free to shout out in the chat where you're watching from, and if you'd like to ask questions, you can put those in the chat or in the Ask a Question box at the bottom center of the screen, and Dr. Walker-Barnes will pull those in as she sees fit, but otherwise we're just going to kick back and have a really great conversation. So thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. And welcome virtually to Atlanta.
No, I was in Atlanta last week, but for 24 hours, my God, sister turned 40.
One of those quick, yeah, well, welcome. I'm so excited about this conversation and about this book. You know, I'm a fan, so I mean, I will give people a disclaimer. I did write the foreword to this book, so I'm not exactly unbiased. But I'm so excited for this book and this conversation. I'm a fan of both of your book, Parable of the Brown Girl. You know, I use it in one of my classes, so it's a required reading in one of my classes. But this book takes us in such a different direction. So I want to know, and I don't know if you want to do a reading first, but I kind of want to know a little bit of the backstory of the book, right? Yeah. What led you, especially after writing Parable of the Brown Girl, which really opens the door in a conversation about the struggles that many Black girls in the U.S. are facing. What brought you to writing Unbossed?
Yeah, well, thank you. I love talking about Black girls, and so if I'm smiling, it's just because it's like, yes, I'm a great admirer of your work, of course, and was honored that you wrote the foreword. Unbossed was not it wasn't even a thought. When Parable came out, my editor at the time reached out and said, hey, look, if you're thinking about writing a second one. And I was like, no, so I actually thought Parable was one and done. I wasn't considering myself an author, and I didn't want to write books, plural. I thought that's all I had in me was Parable. So I just put everything in it. And then a close friend of mine died when I was writing Parable. So when I wrote it, I was grieving. And so I spent a lot of time just sad and tired. I just started my job at the Hill where I work now, and I work like 15 hours a day. So I just remember the writing process was pretty excruciating. I would tell my mom, like, I feel so bad writing this book because I want to do justice to these girls' stories, but I don't feel like I'm my best self. I feel like every time I'm going to write, I'm exhausted. I want to nap, but I'm going to write. And even when I do write, I'm sad. So when I was approached about writing a second one, I was like, no thanks. I was like triggered. And also I felt like I was coming out of that fog from Parable. So I wanted to just like enjoy that peace and the sort of fruit of my labor, whatever was going to take place with the book. So this was, January, Parable came out February 2020. So we went off and running for Parable for the first month, and then the quarantine happened because of the pandemic in that March. And still I was pretty adamant. I would see people tweeting about, being all extra productive during the quarantine. And I was like, I'm not writing a book. I'm making cupcakes and taking naps and gonna get fat. Like that's how I'm going to survive. And so I was very adamant about like just taking care of me. And then also seeing what happens with Parable. Stuff happened with Parable, but it was sort of like I didn't feel like I was on the end of really even enjoying it, because I would get like a phone call or text from a friend and say, hey girl, I saw it was listed in Teen Vogue. And I was like, oh really? Let me Google that. Oh, okay. It looks great. Like I wasn't a part of that. But what happened was May of 2020 I remember watching the like virtual graduation that Barack Obama had, for the class of 2020. And everybody was talking about the kids. How are the kids? Are the kids all right? And the focus was a lot on them and how they were handling the pandemic, just the whole sort of situation. But the focus has sort of been on them the past few years with active shooter drills and, just everything that they've been having to go through, just not being able to just be teenagers. So that seed had already been planted. But then when George Floyd was murdered, that's when I think we really were able to see Gen Z rise. After Mike Brown, we saw millennials, but Gen Zers were sort of on the front lines, and we were hearing about them. So that was when I said, you know what, let me start paying like a little bit more attention. I was seeing young people leading movements and organizations, and then I was like, let me see what the Black girls are doing, and they were out there. And so that was, that's the story behind it. It wasn't like one instance where I said, I want to write about Black girls in leadership. It was like all of these little seeds were being planted. And then finally, I just said, you know what? Let me see how I can like highlight. I would love to highlight their stories. And like you said, Parable was a little bit more on the struggles end. I wanted to be not necessarily the positive end, but just take a different spin, not necessarily theological, but leadership wise.
Yeah, I love that. And, you telling the story of kind of the writing of Parable and kind of the difficulty of that. I think it highlights to me what is so special about Unbossed. So I use Parable of the Brown Girl in this class. I teach in my seminary, spiritual care with Black women. And we have a section, we talk about Black girls using this and using Push Out. And there are other books focusing on Black women. And the class is heavy, right? Like by the middle of the semester, my students and I were like, even sessions I hadn't planned to take a trauma focus, like every single conversation took a trauma focus, right? And I am, as somebody who reads young adult literature for my own enjoyment, I've often been struck by how, while there's so much great work focusing on Black youth now, a lot of it does take a trauma focus, right? And one of the things that I love about Unbossed is that it doesn't shy away from struggle.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, this is not one that kind of sugarcoats anything, right? And you do reveal the struggles of these girls' lives, but you choose to highlight their leadership, right? And you choose to highlight just the remarkable things that I want to say ordinary Black girls, but I think they're both remarkable and ordinary,
Yeah.
right? Black girls are doing, and that's one of the things I just love about the book.
Oh, thank you. It's interesting. So I did 1 year in an organizational leadership PhD program back in like 2017. And I didn't finish it because I didn't have the money and they weren't paying me. That's number one. Number two, I didn't get through the year because one of my professors said, you think almost too theologically. So she was like, why are you in leadership studies? And I was like, I don't know. It was one of those, I didn't know what I was doing with my life years, And so, but for the whole year, I had this folder on my laptop and it says PhD and I hadn't looked at it. And I never deleted anything. And it's the whole year we went through leadership theory. We used Peter Northhouse's book Leadership, and we went through it. And of course, my critique when I was in the program was all of this was sort of white male dominated. Leadership theory is all white male dominated. And I remember when I left the program, I had all these books, and I was like, "What am I going to do with these books?" Right? Like, I thought I just wasted the year. Well, fast forward to when I was thinking about this book, I had already did the pitch and signed the contract. And I never actually didn't think about leadership theory. I knew I was talking about leadership, but it never crossed my mind when I signed the contract. It wasn't until I started writing the first chapter that I was in my apartment and I looked back and I saw the leadership books and I was like, oh my God. I was like, these girls, I had done the interviews and I'm like, these girls match one of these. And I went to the folder and I went to my papers that I wrote about, transformational leadership and all of these different forms academically. And I just linked it, So that was really how it came about. Cause I wasn't sure how I was going to write about I knew I was going to highlight their leadership, but I also want them to be taken seriously when it comes to leadership theory. Like, Tyah-Amoy isn't just any old leader. She's a transformational leader. And you can look up transformational leader and you can see she's not just, Black girl that's just leading, No, there is research behind what is an innate gift that she has. There's actual people studying leaders that are just like her, but it just so happens that most of them are, men.
I love that because it validates not just what they are doing, but that they have something to teach us. And I think that's another thing that Unbossed does. It's not just I'm telling you the story of these Black girls for the sake of the story, which the stories in themselves are good enough, but also they have something to teach us about leadership, an area that is very much dominated by white men.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what you want people to learn most from these girls' stories.
There's so much overlap with Parable because I get the same. I used to get the same type of question, like, what do you want to, what do you want us to learn? The kids are all right. That's for starters. I do want for people to feel, because I don't want there to be an unnecessary burden that Black women and girls feel they have to save the world, right? But there is a sense of comfort that I got after interviewing each of the girls who are young women now, who remind me that they're young women. So I try very hard to not call them girls anymore, because if one was like, I'm 17 and a half now. And I'm like, okay, right, you were 15 first interview, right? Got it. So they correct me, but these young women, I felt such a sigh of relief after all my interviews with them. I learned a lot. Some of them I didn't know. Some I did know. I learned quite a bit. Like Amara, I remember leaving my conversation with Amara, and we'll talk about her, of course. But and feeling like, God, I learned so much from her, but I felt like so good about the direction of the world. Like if she's going to be in it, you know? I watched Jaychele, who I wrote about, from the young woman from Rhode Island that had an organization, Gen Z, We Want to Live. Well, now she's all into wrestling. She wasn't into wrestling when I first interviewed her, but she's like a wrestling scholar. I mean, like so I follow her on Twitter and I watch her, but I interviewed her on Instagram Live, and she said, yeah, I'm on the wrestling, whatever. And she's like, I know I wasn't before, but she was like, who I am, my values, even my sort of like push for justice and racial justice, it's going to intersect with whatever I'm interested in. So it's going to show up in wrestling. I'm just like, oh, that's good. Like I just feel so good. So that's what I wanted for Parable, right? Like I wanted for people to feel how I felt after I left the conversations with the girls, full. Like when you leave a church service, a really good word, and you're like, oh, worship was good today, or whatever. Like that's how I felt when I leave these girls. And so that more than anything, I want them to learn from their wisdom and the little tidbits and pointers that they say and that I write in the book. But I do want them to get this sense that the world is going to be in good hands if just these are little like examples, only 8 examples of what's before us.
How'd you find, you said you knew some of them. I'm really curious because they're from all over, right? They're from Ohio and Florida, like they're in, East Coast, like they're from all over the place. How did you meet these girls, discover their stories, decide that they would be the focus of Unbossed?
Yeah. Well, during that part of the pandemic, everybody was online. They're already online, but everybody was really online. So it was like a little, it was easy to like research and look up. But, Ssanyu from chapter 1, I knew Ssanyu. She actually doesn't live far from my parents in New Jersey. But she actually interviewed me for my book release for Parable, the Brown Girl. And someone had just connected us and said, hey, you need to, connect with this girl from Brown Kids Read. And I met her and her mom in a Barnes and Noble. And, said, hey, I would love for you to be she was 15 at the time, or 14. And to interview for Parable. She interviewed so good. And also I just enjoyed starting a mentoring relationship with her. And I remember saying like, man, I wish I would have had known her when I was writing Parable, because I would have put her in Parable. But again, my mentality was that was going to be my only book. So I wasn't thinking I can write about her later. So when I thought about Unbossed, she was the first person that came to mind. Some of the other girls, I reached out to the editor of Ceci magazine, which is a magazine for Black teenage girls. And I happen to know Andrea Butler. I use her magazines for my the conference that I had done, Becoming Conference, and I would order a bunch of magazines and give them to the girls at the conference. So Andrea and I had already had a relationship, and she said, I asked her if she knew, of any girls that stood out, and she's like, yeah, here's about 4 or 5. Maybe 2 or 3 of them out of that I wound up really connecting with and put in the book. And then others, I just happened to, like Amara, she was the climate justice activist. I would look up some of the like white, mainstream activists and go to the organizations they were a part of and look at the team. And I saw Amara on one of the teams and was like, let me read her bio. And then I was able to look her up and saw all the good work she was doing in Maine and went from there. So I had time to do the research, but the girls, they're teenagers. So they're first off, they don't check their email, but even if the email was online, they wouldn't check it. They're not checking it to this day. Like my publisher is trying to do something with them, and she sent an email and I was like, good luck. Like, so I would DM, Grace. I happened to see her. I don't know how I stumbled on Grace, but I saw her video from CNN when she was not the young hero or young wonders, what they call the heroes that are young. And I saw her video with Kelly Ripa and Anderson Cooper or something. I thought that was great. So I reached out to her and her mom got back to me. And so anyway, so from there, whether they responded to DMs or whatever, and I said, hey, look, I'm thinking about writing this book. Would you be interested in chatting? I'd love to, hear more about your story. And most of them were like, sure, okay, what time? Tyah-Amoy, I intentionally looked up because I remembered the Black students from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. I specifically remember when the Black students did they did a press conference and said, hey, there are Black students here at Marjorie. I remembered that. So I went back to the video to watch the press conference and I saw her and then I reached out to her. So it was fun. It was fun just trying to find them. We had time to do it. So, it worked out.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the way that this project, this project, all your work, how it stems out of this passion for Black girls and the way in which you seem to approach the world looking for the stories of Black girls, right? And not just, just keyed into those stories, right? Recognizing the gifts and the talents in ways that are often overlooked in our society. So as you talk and you name the girls and the ways in which you came to know their stories, I'm just thinking, how phenomenal is that, right? To go through life just like, looking for Black girl magic, right? Like that's what it is, right? But just paying attention. That stance. If only more people would go through life paying attention to Black girls.
Thank you. It's interesting. I feel like I've written this in my career, when I've been in spaces that are predominantly white and my positions are like visible or whatever it might be, there's a group of Black girls that always gravitate, like I would be the Black girl that gravitated toward the Black professor, when we were at Princeton Theological Seminary, Yolanda Pierce was hired as the first Black woman professor or whatever, and it was our last year. We all took a class. That's what you do. So I have always felt a responsibility, but the story part of it didn't really come naturally. I'd always felt like, okay, I need to create a space for Black girls, come on over to my house or have mentoring relationships. And their stories, there were only two moments. One was right out of college when I worked at a residential treatment facility for teenage girls, and reading their chart at night, we would have to, write notes about the shift and then for the next person that came in. But there'd be these thick binders, right? For, let's just say, I can use Jaychele, Jessica, whatever, right? And it'd be this thick binder for her. She'd been there for however many years of all the notes from the peoples on the shift. One day, I just decided to go back and say, oh, let me just look through. And you read. That is literally Parable of the Brown Girl. And you know what I mean? Like, in my mind, that's the book. And then you see she was burned with cigarettes and when she was younger, the whatever happened. Again, it's not all struggle, but in that situation it was. But there's so many, and I was just like, that moment changed how I approached that job. It was a job up until that moment. And then after that, I came to work and it wasn't work. It was like, wow, these are human beings that are, it wasn't juvie, but they were pretty much locked away. And, I only worked there for 6 months, but it stuck with me. And so when years later, when I was in between with the PhD, I was also working as a pastoral counselor. My mom's best friend is the head of a wellness center. And she said, I'll bring you on as pastoral counselor because I don't have anybody to deal with these kids. So they were bringing girls. And the parents would be like, I need you to talk to my daughter. I need you to work with my daughter. And that's where a lot of the stories from Parable came. But when I left the one girl that I wrote about in chapter 1 of Parable, I remember driving in my car home that day and being like, if I ever get an opportunity to have a platform to share these girls' stories, I'm going to do it. Like, This was before anybody ever approached me about a book. I didn't think it was going to be a book. That wasn't what I was thinking. But I remember saying that at a red light and saying, there is no way I can be the only one that hears or gets what I'm getting from these encounters. I felt like it was really divine.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. Oh, do you want to do a reading? We haven't done it yet. We started talking and I was like, oh yeah, we haven't even.
Okay, so I'll read. I'm going to read just a bit of the introduction and then a bit of the close. On January 20th, 2021, Amanda Gorman stepped to the podium with poise and confidence. In a commanding voice that served the magnitude of the moment, the National Youth Poet Laureate captured the nation's attention with her inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb. In the moments following, news media outlets marveled at the young poet and activist. How is she only 22? One reporter asked. She reminds me of Maya Angelou, another journalist said. She's a young hero, another exclaimed. It's as if her presence, her maturity, and her wisdom came as a surprise. Yet the brilliance of this young poet was not unforeseen. The very presence of Vice President Kamala Harris and former First Lady Michelle Obama at that ceremony should have left no room for surprise. Of course, an Amanda Gorman exists. Both Vice President Harris and Michelle Obama were once 22-year-old leaders like Gorman herself. In some ways, the surprise itself was telling. Why were so many people seemingly surprised by a Black girl's brilliance, leadership, and confidence? Black women and girls have demonstrated their leadership to this world for as long as we existed. I'm going to skip down. In 1972, Shirley Chisholm became the first woman and first Black major party candidate to run for president of the United States. Her campaign message was Unbought and Unbossed, which became the title of her memoir. Today, almost 50 years later, young Black girls are following in her legacy with their leadership, resilience, and integrity. They, too, are showing the world that they are unbossed, unapologetic in their calling and approach to leading on their own terms. Though their stories are often overlooked, Black girls have always played important roles in social movements in the fight for a better and more equal world. Young Black people played a pivotal role at the height of these movements, and we often call to mind their activism and lessons that they have taught us. In the same way we learn from the Black youth of previous generations, we must turn our attention to the lives of Black girl leaders today. It is important to pay attention to their leadership now because their passion, strength of character, and vision will teach and inspire us in this ever-changing world. That's part of the intro.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
Paying attention to Black girls. You know, there was a moment, it was at some academic conference. It was there it may have been I think it was a specifically womanist session that we were having, right? So there are all these Black women in theology and religion. And there was this one young scholar, she was a grad student at the time. Mm-hmm. And she pointed out that many of us, our work, I think we were on a panel, that we didn't talk about Black girls, right? Mm-hmm. We started our work with women as if, you know, kind of people just kind of sprang out of the Cabbage Patch full grown. And she said, you know, what about Black girls? Nobody's talking about them. And by that point, I had already written Too Heavy a Yoke. And I thought, oh my goodness, right? Even though, you know, in that book, I tell my own story as becoming a strong Black woman early in life. Mm-hmm. But then in the book, I don't talk that none of the other stories I tell are of Black girls, right? And so I'm seeing a turn a little bit, and I think because of her intervention in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But to me, it seems that both Parable and Unbossed are really necessary. And represent Unbossed as both of them, really. But Unbossed especially representing a particular pivot, right? This sort of touchstone, I hope, in the ways in which that people are writing about Black girls, mm-hmm. you know, in general, mm-hmm. And that they're writing about real Black girls, not mm-hmm. just fictive Black girls, but real Black girls doing real things in the world. And I wonder who you think needs to hear this story. Like, is the story for just Black girls and women? Who do you think needs to hear these stories?
I did a Zoom book talk for a Presbyterian church for Parable, and they were all older white women, and it was probably about 25 of them. We were on Zoom. Someone, had a question. She said, I know you didn't write this book for us. And I was like, let me stop you there, because I did write the book for you. Right? Like, with you in mind. I appreciate that when I hear about a Black girl that has read Parable and said, oh, I appreciate, I feel seen. I'm like, that is wonderful. But they weren't actually my primary audience. My perspective, really, I was like, you all that I'm on this call with right now, you really were my primary audience. Because the way that we open the Bible, that's what I was thinking when I wrote that book. And we turn to a section of, Jesus with a woman at the well or whatever. We are on the outside looking into those narratives and learning something. And that was what I was wanting people to read these girls' parables that are on the outside of the parable, but to look in and learn something, glean from the wisdom of the stories and of the girls. That was my perspective all along. And it just so happened that my secondary audience was Black women and girls who were to read it, which is why I wrote Parable so, like, a little bit, like, the language was a little heavier. Like, I wasn't writing it for, when I got the best, like, young adult book or whatever, I was like, thanks. I didn't really like, I didn't write it with kids in mind to read it. Unbossed, on the other hand, was a little less, like, it's not as theological, it was a little less wordy, but at the same time, I still wanted there to be actual, like, researched, like, when I talk about transformational leadership or strategic leadership, I went to the research on those. So, but I had Black girls more in mind for Unbossed, because I did want them to see themselves, but, like, not in the sense that we've overused that phrase, like, oh, see yourself represented. Yes, of course, right. But, like, no, actually, like, you can find Jaychele on Twitter, right? Like, it's beyond representation. You can reach out to Ssanyu and have a conversation with her because she's your homegirl from down the street in Jersey, right? Like that, everything that you heard about from what happened with the shooting at the high school in Parkland, Florida, that Tyah-Amoy now, she's not just some girl at a podium, she's out crocheting, she cut her hair, she didn't look like she does in the book. Like, like she's just she's just this is how it is, and that was really what I wanted. I wanted the girls to be, like, really tangible. So even for, like, the picture, it's not really like a picture book, but for this, like, if they see their faces, right, like you said earlier, they're not fiction. These are, you can find Grace and you can even help with her organization and be a part of it. Or if you have an idea, you can actually start something, like, similar, So they were more my primary audience. Black girls were my primary audience more for this book, but my secondary audience were those that were, older adults or, not Black, who want to learn something about like, what is your leadership style? So I do have those secondary audiences in mind. But I think it's interesting. Like, I love what you're affirming something and confirming something for me, because I want to go back to Black girlhood and theology for another potential book. And I have been thinking a lot about, we even we talk about womanism, right? It presupposes girls. It's in there, Black women and girls. We say that phrase quite a bit. But I have to catch myself too, in making sure that there is a distinction, even though there's a lot of overlap. And how do we work with that? So I've been thinking a lot about that lately.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I love when you talk about there's something about the accessibility of these girls, right? Not that they are real, that they are continuing to evolve, right? And that you can see the evolution because they're on social media, right? They're
Right.
in the public sphere. And I wish I had it. I wish I had this book. I was, as in reading and even thinking about today's conversation, I remember back to, I think I was a sophomore in college and I wanted to start a magazine for Black girls. And I
Mm.
was doing like all kinds of research. I was like calling printers and
Oh.
and my cousin was in high school and we would be having these business meetings, where we would be like, okay, what needs to be in this
Good.
magazine? Because we thought, we're reading 17 and teen. What about us? Right.
Yeah.
And flipping through the pages trying to see, oh, there's one. and and I think, for other things, how much it would have been inspirational for me and felt like my goal were more attainable if I had seen ordinary Black girls doing things, right? Because we do love to prop up Black superstars, right? Usually the stories that we see, very often Black women's stories don't get attention until people are already famous, right? And so until they're already, okay, they're already a superstar, they're already a politician, they're already, internationally known. Now they get a book, right?
Right.
Right. And so we don't get to see these ordinary stories. It doesn't feel as real.
Mhm.
But these girls, you get to see the way in which there's genius, right? In ordinary girls that just, needs a little bit of, nurturing, support, affirmation, or just stay out their way. It's just,
Yeah.
like just let them go. And I think that to me is so powerful. It's such a powerful story for Black girls of all ages, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They I also was very intentional about, because I did in the beginning. I was like, I'm not gonna name any names, but I was like, I'll do this person, that person. And then I was like, you know, there are girls that are just in our communities that are doing some really good work. And I wanted to find them, those ones, like you said, that were accessible and tangible. We know, there's a part of me, I tweeted this. I was like, I truly believe that one of these girls is going to be, sitting in the Supreme Court hearing, you know what I mean? Like, that we'll look back. And I just count it an honor to be a part of their journey, no matter where they go. And so it's been fun to watch them even evolve in the last 2 years, you know, just how different they are. And some, again, that I know more personally than others, like Ssanyu, her mom sent me her prom pictures and like, she went to prom. The baby. Like, they're so cute. Actually, let me show you. Because she sent me these pictures and I'm just like, this is so cute. And, keeping that relationship, keeping that going. So, okay, so this was, can you see it? It's
Oh my goodness.
baby. Sweetheart.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they're accessible. Who knows who they're going to be? It is just seeing about Jaychele and her wrestling. I don't know anything about wrestling. She just loves wrestling. She's all she talks, all she tweets about. I'm like, why not? I was tempted in the beginning when we first started promo, was like really wanting the girls to be who they were, or an extension of who they were 2 years ago. I had to check myself.
Yeah.
Because Ssanyu is still doing Brown Kids Read. She gonna be doing it. That's it. Grace is still doing We Can Serve Foundation and movement. But some of the other ones aren't. Tyah-Amoy is not doing March for Our Lives. She was like, they not gonna use me. You know what I mean? Like that was her thing. And she said, and then she was talking about the trauma that she had been through. And I'm like, why should she still be doing it? That was traumatic. That literally
Mhm.
robbed her of her part of her adolescence. And so now she's just being a student at Stanford, and she does some Black student union stuff, and she likes to crochet. Her whole Instagram is about her crochet business. And so when we were doing promo, I was like, I'm going to tag you and people are going to, they're going to go to your page and they're not going to think you're the person that I talked about. Because not only do you crochet, but you cut all your hair and you dyed it blonde, like, so those were things in the beginning that I was like, oh, and then I had to be like, oh yeah, Black girls evolve just like Black women. And they're normal human beings. And Tia said, I love doing March and I love doing speaking, and I'm not doing that right now. One day I might return to it. One day I might not.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, that is powerful. It also makes me curious to think, what have they learned by watching older generations, especially older Black women lead in, and how have they decided to do it differently? Because I'm keenly aware of, again, in academic spaces, how younger womanists often look at older womanists, right, our aunties, mothers, figures, all that, and say, yeah, we recognize we're standing on your shoulders, but we're gonna do it a little bit different because we see some things, right?
Yeah,
And I'm wondering, what do they see?
Yeah.
And what have they looked at and saw from older women and said, yeah, no, I'm gonna do, or like, I mean, by older women, it could be millennials, right? It could be for them.
Well, no, that is what they mean. They mean millennials. that actually stings, because I'm not really even a millennial. You know what I mean? Like, so when they say that, I'm like, oh, but I know what I wish I had asked them that question. I have actually like a general response, but I wish I had asked them that on a deeper level. And I will go back and ask them. It may not be in a book, but but Jaychele, when she was talking about creating Gen Z We Want to Live, part of that happened because she was feeling a little shunned from her local chapter of BLM. And feeling like they were like, wait your turn, youngin. The same old, same, we just perpetuated every generation. We can't help it. And we say we're not going to do it. And then do it. So they were like, we'll start our own organization. And that's where how Gen Z We Want to Live started. But one of the things I've noticed about all the girls, young women, are that they are their mental health is priority by any means necessary. And I see that as being very distinctive. If they had to respond to your question, they're like, yeah, it's not going to kill me. I'm not going to work, till retirement, or I'm not going to work, and see like the work as the bigger picture. And then I'm burnt. They won't. It's not self-care in the way that I have to remind myself to try to, like, the self-care has to be like a part of my lifestyle, but not even in a lifestyle sense of like, okay, I go on vacation this time and I'm going to do self-care. I think self-care like that. They think self is weaved into every day. It's part of who they are. And so the self-care and the mental health piece is it's priority, even above, in a radical way, really even above the work. And they know the work is important, but they realize that they can't be sacrificed. Like, if they're no good, then if they're no good, then the work won't get done. Whereas I can think back in my 20s and be like, it was just work, resume, build, career, social, whatever. And then I get to me later. And I even heard Beyonce, they were talking about Beyonce and how, she was saying like, okay, I'm 40 now, I'm going to enjoy the fruit of my labor. Like, so y'all not going to see me that much. I'm going to be enjoying. And I hear that and I'm like, good for you, girl. They hear that and they're like, no, we're not waiting. That would be an older generation mentality, I think, that they would think. And that now they'll start now. Tyah-Amoy is like, nope, 2 years of work I put in, and now I'm not doing that. And Jaychele was going to run for Rhode Island State Senate recently. So she said she had she's like, yeah, I had, campaign posters and had a campaign manager, and we were already set. I was going to be one of the youngest people to run for a state senate. And then I thought, I just want to focus on prom and go graduate. I was like, okay. She said it like it was so matter of fact. It was on an Instagram Live. My mom was cracking up when we were talking about it after, because she was like, then I thought, nah, maybe later, whereas I think had I had that mentality when I was her age, I mean, I wouldn't have run for state senate because I just wasn't there. But had I had that mentality, I would have been like, no, I gotta be the youngest. I gotta push through this. I gotta, it wouldn't have been so easy for me if I was that passionate and, like to be like, no, I'm just gonna go to prom, I'll do it later. I love that about them.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, like, I'm like, oh, I need to start flipping through the book, because I'm thinking that sense comes through the book. I think in terms of all of them are, at the point in the book, what they were undertaking, it wasn't just for them, right? They were doing these projects because they felt like other people needed it, right? I'm trying to think that the app, the not okay, yeah, the not okay app, right? That's a sense of other people need this service, and I'm going to do this as a sense of service to other people, and because I have this gift. And yet, I think many of them also seem to demonstrate this commitment to self, right? That and even when they are wrestling with how their leadership also impinges on their lives in other ways, right? And there's an awareness that I see in them that I think for many older generations, especially Gen X and older, it's often after you felt the wear and tear for a long time that then you kind of step back and say, oh, wait a minute. But they seem to have this awareness so young.
Yeah. It is it's inspiring. In fact, it's convicting, because it's not innate within me. I have to keep reminding myself. And for them to, like even with the book, I think I thought they were all gonna be like, yeah, we in a book. And they are. They're like, we're in a book. But they're like, we're in a book. Okay, back to life, some are like, what can I do to promote? Are we gonna be on Oprah? Like you might have one or two that are like that. Let me see if she's reconnecting. Sorry, y'all, I don't see Dr. Barnes anymore.
We will keep getting Dr. Barnes back. Let's see. One sec. I think that was just a weird little accident there.
There she is.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. It was only a second.
My internet doesn't usually do that, but it kind of flaked out on me for a second.
Well, okay. So I remember my thought. Oh wait, okay? I think we're good, right?
Okay, I think so.
Yeah. So only one or two were like, "Yeah, we're gonna do this." The other ones were like, "I'm gonna go to Barnes and Noble and take a picture with the book." They're all, if I was in a book, you know what I mean? I would be when I was their age. And I'm not slighting them. It really is just a testament to who they are really dedicated and all in when it comes to just being so true to themselves, the moment that they're in, whatever stage they're in life, and there's nothing that's going to come along that's going to take them out of that. They're grateful about, being in the book, and they'll do whatever they do. Parents are excited, whatever, but, they're also in school. Amara is at Northeastern now. She's very much into what she does. She's got a cute little boyfriend, like that's her focus, and So I might have sent some text messages to the group, and one probably responded weeks later and was like, I'm so sorry, it's just been crazy at school. Okay. But I got your message, and head on over to Barnes and Noble. I'm like, okay. They're just what we're doing, in life. And it's not a selfish thing. It is a radical act of self-care.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when folks talk about, especially Gen Z, millennials, I mean, I guess they've been doing it since the beginning of time, but there's often a focus on their self-awareness, right? And I almost want to use the word self-centeredness, but I don't mean it in the term of selfishness, but that they are aware of their own needs, right? And they often act with their own needs at the core of their being and thinking about what this mean for me, right? There's a real clear sense of who am I? Who do I want to be? How does this advance my interests? There's an assumption that that's the only story, not recognizing that they are doing that and serving. They are doing that and, being protesting, right? They are doing that and trying to advance justice in all these different ways. They're doing that in innovating. Right? They're doing that and going to school, right?
Right.
It's not an either or thing for them.
No, it's fascinating. And I always talk about Gen Z in general. I told one kid once, I said, we had fire drills. I never had an active shooter drill. She's like, you never had an active shooter drill? And I was like, I mean, no. And I got sad listening to that, but they having to juggle that and the pandemic and the craziness of what's going on politically and war and all that. And yet they're still talking about prom, yet they're still leading organizations, and they're juggling these things, which to me would have taken me out as a teenager. But to them, this is innately who they are. And if they are going to have these things, then self-care and prioritizing self has to be, it's necessary.
Yeah, we know it's necessary for us, right? To kind of weather, like as you were saying, your COVID response, which sounds to me like mine at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, no, we have to really focus on keeping ourselves healthy to get through this period. And some of us as adults recognize that that's our need. But we see, I think, among many of these young women, that they recognize that in adolescence, that they need it now. Not we need it down the line, but they need it now. Some of them learned it through, giving, and then recognize, okay, I got to pull back. Some of them learned it through illness, right? So they're not just dealing with kind of the, issues of activism and family, but several of them, I think at least 2 to 3 offhand, I'm thinking of, who had some serious health issues.
Yeah. It was Grace, who had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and Hannah, who did the Not Okay app, who I don't even know what the name of hers it was. And actually both of them had dealt with issues with doctors and the medical people in the medical profession not believing them or not taking them seriously. So there was that part of it that was in that too. So there's just so many layers to what these young people are going through. I think that what makes it urgent imperative for us to learn from them is a lot of we've not been through. We've been through our own stuff, but we've not been through what they've been through, and yet they're still able to come out of that and still lead and still push forward. And like you said, still be marching, still be I would have been horrible on social media. I am so glad I didn't grow up with social media. Oh my God. I'm barely good at it now, but who knows what I would have said and done. But yet they're creative. They were doing, creative TikToks and still teaching us stuff. And I mean, they're just a fascinating generation that I think we need to hone in on and say, what is it in them? And for me, particularly the Black girls, because they have that added layer Black girlhood, of struggle, and those, you know, the things that Black women and girls consistently deal with, and yet they're still, you know, coming out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm so not fascinated, but I love hearing you talk about the continued conversations that you have with many of them, and the way in which they continue to evolve. Because one of the concerns I had as I was reading, of course, given my own work, is, are these strong Black women in the making? And there were some cases where you could kind of see it rear its head a little bit, but then you can also see some awareness from them. So again, this idea that they are doing this, and they're also starting to feel some of the effects, and so to hear that some of them are even saying, you know what, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm going to prom.
Right.
To me, it's just such a mark of maturity, and that many of us have lacked. Right? It's a different type of maturity, right? It's an emotional maturity. It's again a self-awareness maturity, right? It shows that level of, again, commitment to themselves, and recognizing that own their own lives, like their achievements that got them in this book came out of their lives, and often their struggles. But they didn't lose focus on themselves in trying to then serve other people out of that. And I just that so hearing you even talk about how they've continued to evolve is just really heartening and inspiring. So it's inspiring to see what they develop, and it's also inspiring to hear some of them making this decision for themselves, that no, that's not what I'm going to use my time for right now. I'm going to tweet about wrestling, right?
Right. Well, let me say, there's one Kynnedy, who is the violinist. I did an Instagram live with her the other day, and we stay in touch quite a bit. And I asked her, I said, what are your what do you do for fun? I was like, what are your hobbies? I said, is violin something that you consider to be like a self-care thing? And I don't remember the exact phrase. She said, I've learned that anything that you can attach commitment to, when you attach commitment to it, you take away the fun. Like she said, when you attach commitment to something that you like to do, then it takes away the fun. So she was like, so I no longer categorize things as self-care or hobbies that have commitments attached to it. So she was like, so as much as I love violin, I have to play it now because I'm in the orchestra or whatever. So I don't rely on violin as being my my hobby, or my fun self-care thing. Now I have to fill that with something else. I was like,
Yeah.
I literally was taking notes. Like I was like, that is good. I just wanted. I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, that. So, to me, that resonates so strongly. Like, she just ministered to my spirit.
Yeah, that was me.
I like to craft. And every time I do something, I have family or friends that say, you need to start selling stuff. And I've tried to explain to people, then it wouldn't be fun. Right? Because then I would have to do it. It would be on a deadline. It would be, I got to get it done by this date. But to hear her name it in such a clear and concise way, like when you attach commitment to it. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. We had like a moment of silence after, because I literally was like, I was sitting there and I was thinking about the things, and like you said, I couldn't articulate it. So even writing, when people say, oh, that's what you do fun, like, like, it's not really that fun anymore. I mean, I like it, but even for her to go as far as to say, now there's nothing in that category anymore. Now I have to fill that category so that part of me, I can experience that. Whereas for me, I don't think it was like, okay, the things that may have once been fun that I attach commitment to might move to another category, but like I never replace it. I never say, well, now I'm gonna just go and paint or or do whatever. Man, that sat with me. They still sitting with me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah. And again, it is just, they say out of the mouths of babes, but I do think it just, I'm looking at the subtitle, How Black Girls Are Leading the Way, that over and over again, they are leading us, right? If we pay attention, they are really leading us and they're trying to point us to something. As we all struggle with how do we live in this new normal? Well, they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a new normal for them. It's the only one they've ever known.
Right.
Right? They've grown up in climate crisis and all these other things. And so and so they are the way, right? They really are pointing the way for us. So I think that is just so profound to see the ways in which, they continue to lead. I'm curious as to whether there were any of the girls' stories that you saw yourself in, or you saw part of yourself in, or was there anything? Because I know in several of them, when I was reading, I was like, oh wow, that's like, I mean, not that I was anywhere near.
No, yeah.
But there's still these places where I'm like, there's this resonance, and I'm just curious as whether you had that experience.
Probably more. Well, there's a little bit of all of them. Stephanie at the end. Stephanie is she has a website called Black Feminist Collective, and her work focuses on Black feminism and abolishing prisons, etc. But Stephanie is not let's say vocal. She's not like an out front leader. She's actually very timid, like to the point where she actually like almost like asked to not be in the book at the last minute. The book was already printed. And I was like, we had to have a nice moment. We had a nice talk after this. So there have been teachable moments even after even after the book has come out. Where I'm like, now in the future, you commit to something, right? Like, make sure you don't want to burn bridges. You don't, like, we've had these conversations, but she has my heart in the sense that I was not a very like outspoken, upfront young person, but I always knew that I had like leadership like in me, but I didn't look like everybody, not just physically, but like, just my demeanor. And it wasn't just like, I wasn't all out front. I'm not gonna be marching in the street, that type of thing. Stephanie is not that person. And I taught a class for this conference called At the Well Conference. And I taught Unbossed, the manuscript, last year before it came out. And one of the girls said, so glad we went through this, because she said, I consider myself a strategic leader, or I consider myself a this leader. But she was like, but I'm not very like vocal. I'm not very much out front. So I was like, maybe I'm not a leader. But then she was like, but then I read like Stephanie's chapter, and she was like, she still is a leader, but we all think leaders look a certain type of way, or they sound, or they're like Malcolm X, and that's really transformational leadership. That's just one form of leadership. But I wasn't that. And so when people ask me like, when did your leadership start? And it wasn't until later. I was a much later bloomer, but I would answer that in the sense of like when I decided to be out front, or when I took public speaking or preaching 101, but the leadership actually started before then, that it wasn't always just because I was out front. So I actually felt Stephanie's, because she really has to work on, because she has something on the inside of her that's powerful, but because of her timid nature, and some of her social anxieties, it's very hard for her to push through. So she has to find ways of pushing through, and then use her voice and her writing and other types of spaces, but she's still leading the way. It's just not in the manner in which we see it plastered on social media. So I relate to her quite a bit.
Yeah. I actually, I think for me too. I think when I first read it, when I got to the end, I was like, oh, that's a different one, right? She's a very different, even on the page. Her story stands out, is very different from the other stories, but then what she decides to do with that. And I'm curious as to whether being chosen for the book, even though she struggled with that, if that had helped her to identify herself as a leader. Because I know for me, it took me years to be to recognize I was a leader. And it was only because people told me I was a leader that I finally accepted, okay, maybe I'm a leader. Because I think my approach was much more like Stephanie, kind of the quiet. I'm not going to be out in front of everything. If I run for something, it's because maybe because I felt like I had to prove a point, or there was something that propelled me into that, where I felt like I had no other choice. But then also this kind of very subtle but profound thing she does in terms of creating her own platform, seeing that there is this view, this feminist, this Black feminist viewpoint, this intersectionality, that she's an educational leader, right? Like, she's saying, I want to teach people, I want to connect them to something that's going to liberate them. And what a profound act of leadership that is, but it's not one that many people recognize.
Right. Yeah. I would definitely say that, about myself. And after going to seminary, you have to sort of learn and to be in these public spaces. But it was a push through. It was a fight for me. But looking back, I really wish early on that I would have had other models of leadership that weren't, so not that I could just choose, but at the same time, so I can see, but I only saw one type, and I thought I need to have a mic in my hand. And, if it go, Christy, we need you to pray. All right, I'm gonna pray, and I was like, I remember being asked to pray and being like super nervous because I had to pray in that public way, so that's what I thought leadership was.
Yeah.
And, didn't realize. And I had my pastor was very much a transformational leader, growing up in a Black church, a pastor, secretary of state, and he's doing all this stuff, so he's like, those were my examples. But I do wish early on someone were able to like pull out my gifts and things, and then it wasn't so focused on the external, and then develop that internal, and then develop after that, which is what I kind of see with Steph. She does go back and forth. She cleared her whole Instagram page right before the book came out, but she had all her leadership stuff up there. But I think then when the attention started to come with the book and we were letting them know, she was like, she cleared it all out. So, they're all so different, Black girls are layered. It's interesting to end with Stephanie because Ssanyu is the complete opposite. I have to wheel her in. And when you're talking about that strong Black woman thing, I have to say to her often, you can chill. You know what I mean? Like, you don't. So we have these two bookends of the, of the one end and one beginning of the book. They're so extreme, and then the other girls are all in between, and they are layered. But I am glad to still be, in contact with them and be able to watch them and help whatever I can do, depending on the relationship that we have moving forward.
Yeah, they do. Again, thinking, back to you talking about leadership theory as we're talking, I am just reminded of how many different ways they are showing us that leadership is possible, right? And not always that sort of male-centered, charismatic leader model, but there are many different ways that, women's leadership often looks different. And then particularly as Black women from Gen Z, that their leadership can take so many different forms. And I think that's one of the other gifts of the book, and why it's, it is important it's not just for Black girls, right? So it's not just that for those of us who are women that we read this book so that we can help Black girls. I think we can read this book. Any of us as adults can read this book and learn and glean from them and be inspired by them, right? And maybe see in their leadership our own gifts as leaders and the different ways in which we lead in our different spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I hope. That's what I hope for us as Black women, but also other people. Like I said, like I hope a white man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
White cis man is reading the book and is like, wow, I'm a strategic leader. You know, I got that from
Yeah.
Ssanyu. I just hope we have different examples that we can default to, or, you know, as opposed to Martin Luther King, you know.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. But
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is that sort of the focus that we need still from the civil rights movement is the number of people who, you know, all the organizing that took place for King to kind of come into town and lead the march. But it was usually Black women, Black girls,
Mm-hmm.
Black youth who were paving the way and doing all of that groundwork for those big public moments. And you get to see how that hasn't been lost in this generation, right? It's, if anything, they are taking it and adding to the technology, these tools, and they are finding ways to make their voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so again, we often look at social media. I tell my own, I have a middle schooler, and I'm always having to tell him about the dangers of social media and how to navigate his presence on social media. And I say, you know, every generation did dumb stuff. Your generation just has the risk of having it documented for the whole world to see for
Mm-hmm.
all time.
Right.
So, you know,
Yeah.
we often think of social media as this horrible thing, but I think almost every story here involves what these young women learning how to leverage technology
Mhm.
to help them advance, you know, the issue, the cause that they want to advance.
Yeah.
And just some really powerful ways it shows the kind of democratizing
Mm.
function of social media and how all of us can make a difference in our little corner of the world just with what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even with Hannah,
Yeah.
just real quick with Hannah with the Not Okay app, you know, with her envisioning herself in her moment of distress, pressing that button and saying, "Well, what do teenagers do? They always have their phone. They always press a
Yes.
button." And using that, I mean, to juggle that, technology was not in my brain, you know. So they're having to think about they're having to think about pandemic and COVID and technology, and somebody might come in and shoot, and you know who's going to be the president, crazy, you know, like all of that, and still be young people, and then still fulfill their callings. It's just there's a lot we can learn.
Yeah. I want to make sure that those who are watching, if you have questions, I've checked the ask a question a couple of times and I don't see anything popping up. But if you do have questions, we have just a little bit longer. So please do put your questions either in the chat or the ask a question feature so that we can make sure that we get that in. And then I'll also, I think ER might say this again too, but also if you haven't gotten this incredible book, then I would invite you to use that little till bar down at the bottom so you can buy this version Unbossed, as well as then the middle grades version, which I already know that's the gift that's going to be given to the girls in my family this Christmas. Every year, I've started doing this for the past couple of years, is all the kids in my family, I realize they all have what they need. Like they they have everything they need. They have most of what they want, and buying Christmas gifts was just it's just so hard. Like I'm just like, I don't know what to get these kids. They what? What? And finally, so the past couple of years, I've decided I'm going to pick books for them. I'm going to pick a book for them that I think nobody else will pick for them, but I think they will really enjoy reading. And so that's been the gift. So when I realized there was a middle grade version, I was like, okay, check that one off.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So what was the conversation? I'm really curious about the conversation that led to deciding to do the middle grade version. And I know a lot of several authors. I was actually in Charis earlier today and saw a few other books, and some that I didn't realize they had developed one for young readers, and some that I had. But what was the conversation that led to that?
It was pretty simple because they wanted to do one. Beaming Books, who's under the same imprint of Broadleaf, the editor reached out to me about doing one for Parable. He said, we were thinking about doing one on the heels of Parable. And I said, I don't know how you're going to do that, because they wanted to do something general, and Parable is still very spiritual. And I didn't necessarily want to take that part out. So if you take that out, what does Parable look like? And then I just was like, it's going to be weird to illustrate the girls. The topic was very serious. And I was already in the middle of the negotiations for Unbossed. And so I said, I think it makes more sense to do it with my newest book. And that was it.
Wow.
That was really how, because I was like, we have the girls. I can show their faces. I couldn't show the faces for Parable because they were anonymous. So we'd be making faces up, if we did Parable. And we had them right there. We were already going to use their photos and on regular Unbossed. So we just took my first manuscript because they were going to get a person to adapt it. And then I was like, well, why do you need that when, I'm not writing it like to the extent where it couldn't be edited down. And so that was pretty simple. Then I didn't even see the illustrations till much, much later. And it just so happened that they did a great job. But have you seen the illustrations in the book? Let me show you. They did a great job with the illustrations. They really brought out. So this is just the intro right here. But I think that this is Grace. I think I want to show you. Let's do Hannah. So like here's Hannah's, who we were just talking about. So it's obviously black and white, and they have her quote, and then they go into her story. But then when they start talking about, they do like a little thing up here on mental health. And then they show I love that this black girl, and she's like sort of curled up there. I just thought that was so, but then they did the Not Okay app here. And then at the end of the chapters, we'll see, we have some people. So here's some of the comments from the Not Okay app that people were saying about it. But then at the end of each chapter, you have the girls' wisdom. So what you learn, here's the leadership, and then it's okay to not be okay. And so each of them just goes into that. It's all very similar. So they did a really great job. And then the end, the conclusion, they did the Shirley Chisholm quote, and then they have Shirley.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so they did a great job with it. The illustration is, the content, of course, is what it is, but they did a great job with the illustrations. Yeah.
It looks like I will be making another trip back to Charis soon, because I forgot to look for that version. I did notice that they had the regular version in there today, and I was like, well, I have that one, but I forgot to look for that one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, they did a good job with. Here's Grace's. So this is this little racial bias in healthcare. They've got a thing, and then they talk about her We Can Serve movement. It's just they really did a good job with illustration. Yeah. So, and again,
I love.
I was gonna say, like you said, they're not opening it up and seeing a fiction character.
It's real
about the accessibility there.
Yeah. And it will give Black girls the language to describe their experience and to see some of the commonalities in the experiences of Black girls and women, right? So thinking about the racial bias in healthcare, I don't know a single Black woman who hasn't had to deal with that in their own, trying to find a doctor, trying to get a doctor to listen to them, trying to get a diagnosis, trying to get I don't know a single Black woman who hasn't dealt with that, right? And then, so what does it mean to help educate girls about that, but also to let them know early, right? To give them that language so that they know, oh, this is what is happening to me when I go to the doctor, when my mom takes me to the doctor and they're not listening to me, that's what this is. So yeah, I think that is such a powerful. Yeah, I'm excited. I don't need a reason to buy more books, but I'm so excited for this. I'm so excited for this to get into the hands of more girls and young women, but also for anyone who works with Black girls, right? So when you were talking about sort of the secondary audience, that, you know, all the folks who can be in places where they can either encourage or squash a girl's dream or vision, right? And that's teachers, many of whom, for, you know, are not Black women, right? Most Black girls are not being taught by Black women. So it's teachers, it's coaches, it's pastors and youth pastors. There's so many other people who I really hope will get these books and read them. Read them with the girls and the young women in your life. Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. Yeah, thank you for those who are saying. I'm checking for questions again. Yeah, I'm so glad that folks are ready to share it. Yes, please share it. Organize book clubs for the girls and young women in your lives, so that they can read the book and talk about their own lives. Yeah. Yeah. Have you had a chance to do book clubs with young people on this yet?
Me?
Yeah.
I was talking to this person that.
Oh no. And if anybody else has, please chime in. But I was wondering, Christy, have you had a chance to talk with any groups or just groups of young people who've read the book?
Yeah. So yes. Not this one so far.
Okay.
My dog is snoring. Sorry. But I did a mother-daughter book. There was a mother-daughter book club that I came in on the end of it for Parable. There were a lot of book clubs for Parable, particularly during the pandemic, that I came in and just talked an end of. Obviously, this one just came out. So, but for Unbossed so far, so at the Well, is a conference. No, it's not really a conference. It's like a 2-week. It's like an academic sort of leadership. I want to call it a conference for Black girls, and it always takes place at Princeton University. But for the last few years, it was virtual. So I was a teacher for it for the first year that it was virtual, and then last year, and Unbossed was just a PDF, and I was with those girls for pretty much those weeks, and we went through each chapter and went through all the leadership. So that was great. And then with my Becoming girls, I had a group that I work with for this conference that I was doing. But I had 15 girls, or 10 to 15 girls. We went through, for the month of July last year, we went through Unbossed. And then we went on a 3-day leadership retreat that I took them on. And we sifted through it. So those were both sort of like different. They weren't necessarily book clubs, but it's fun going. I did the same thing for Parable the Brown Girl for at the Well. We did Parable the Brown Girl every day for 2 weeks for like an hour every morning, and went through every single chapter, broke everything down, used your book for Too Heavy a Yoke for the Strong Black Woman chapter. We'd use secondary resources, watch videos, everything. We broke it all down. And these were girls. I had about 45 girls from all across the country. And it's fun. They're like my test audience, you know. They're not like, "Ooh, you're an author." They're like, "What are we reading?" You know. So, and they all had the same issues. You know what I mean? They all had the same. It was great. So going through both books and being able to go through chapter by chapter and just breaking everything down and listening to their stories with a group of Black girls has been a real blessing for me, like a real blessing. So I would love to see some more Unbossed book clubs as the book comes out or is out a little bit more.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much. I know we're wrapping up, and I'm going to invite ER back in to give us our kind of closing instructions as he gets ready to come in. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Christy, before we get ready to transition?
Oh, I love this. I love you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both so much. This was great. I want to encourage folks who are watching at home again to click this teal button. That will take you to both versions of Unbossed, as well as Christy's first book and both of Dr. Walker-Barnes' books. So you get all 5 in one. We do, of course, encourage you to buy these books for your, public library, your child's school library, if you're an alum of a college or a high school and you want to donate it to that library, that's always a really good thing to do. It really helps authors when you do that. And of course, in this moment where so many books are being challenged in libraries, it is a political act to donate them to libraries. So the more the merrier. Please consider doing that. Even if you don't buy it from us, buy it from an independent bookstore and do that. It really does help. And I want to encourage folks to always to leave good reviews and things like that, and just tell a friend. So if you're involved in a church book club or sorority book club or anything like that, get this book on the list to be talked about, because that's how authors get their books known and out in the world, especially during pandemic times when even though we're half opening back up, it's still, the challenges are real. So we want to make sure that we are supporting this book completely. So thank you both so much for this robust conversation and for your work in the world.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yeah, take care.